You may recall when I mentioned about the GST holiday that Justin Trudeau is playing Santa Claus and saying that, hey, we're going to give you guys a little break. We're going to give you $250. We're going to cut the taxes on things. Don't get your hopes up. I told people that. Don't get your hopes up because the worst is yet to come. The worst is after that little tax holiday. And basically, that holiday is to bribe people from finding out exactly what's going to happen next. So, Canadian Action says a family of four can expect to pay up to over $800 more on food in 2025, according to a report by Dalhousie University, University of Guelph, University of Saskatchewan, and the University of BC. And they link this to a National Post article here where it says a family of four can expect to pay up to $101.56 more on food in 2025, according to the 15th edition of Canada's Food Price Reports. Produced by Dalhousie University, University of Guelph, University of Saskatchewan, and University of BC, the report predicts an annual food expenditure of over $16,000 and a total price increase of 3 to 5%. Using machine learning, AI models, and expert knowledge, the report forecasts that meat will experience the highest increases at 4 to 6%, followed by vegetables and restaurants at 3 to 5%, bakery and dairy at 2 to 4%, and fruit and seafood at 1 to 3%. Isn't it interesting? It's all the good food that's, healthy and nourishing for humanity. But don't worry, those bowl of Lucky Charms chemicals are going to be, price affordable. Researchers expect the cost of some commodities, such as olive oil, to drop. So that's pretty good. Olive oil is not a processed seed oil, so that's pretty good. But predict that others, namely beef, citrus, coca, and coffee, will remain high. Beef prices increased by 9.2% from 2023 to 2024, according to Stuart Smith, or is it Stuart Smythe? I'm going to go Smith, an agricultural professor at the University of Saskatchewan, and the report's campus lead. They will likely stay elevated for the next 2 to 3 years. The Canadian beef herd is the smallest it's been since the 1980s, said Smith, due to the continuation of multiple years of drought and reduced pasture and forage protection. Farmers are reducing the herd size. They simply haven't got the capacity to carry their full herds. Now, it's interesting that they don't also mention, and this is why farmers in the Netherlands have been protesting about this, is that because of a lot of regulations, because of a lot of governments going after and diminishing a lot of these farms to go towards factory farming, to go towards mega corporations that want to buy up this farmland, is also putting pressure on a lot of agricultural goods because they want to reduce the amount of farmland available, and they use the excuse of methane, which we know that's just a complete lie. It's a fabrication. They want to diminish a lot of this agricultural land to send it towards factory farming so that people like Bill Gates can mass produce fake meats and beyond beef. At the other end of the spectrum, the report predicts minor price increases for seafood. We might see more demand for seafood products than we would, say, for beef or pork, says Smith. He expects more people to dine out less, often due to the rising prices, especially at higher-end restaurants. Christina Comfortschmidt, pardon my French there, assistant professor at the University of Prince Edward Island, who worked on the report as a doctoral student at the University of Guelph and Vector Institute, also thinks the increased cost of living could result in the shifting behaviors. People might reconsider their protein sources, adopting new recipes for local, lower-cost foods they may not have chosen to eat before, such as freshwater fish in landlocked regions or seafood on the coasts. Roughly half of Canadians choose primarily for affordability, followed by nutrition at 24.9%. People are making compromises to get enough food, but they're not able to prioritize their health the way they were, says Cumberschmidt. almost like it was planned. Almost like it's kind of preemptively planned. Because if there really was a huge inflation and the ingredients for certain things are skyrocketing, then why isn't cereal also part of this? Why are we not talking about the inflation of Coca-Cola? Or is it because we're prioritizing those starchy, sugary foods towards organic food? Quebec and the Maritimes will likely contend with the food's inflation rates above the national average in 2025. Canada's food price report does not include the protections for the territories where costs are higher than the rest of the country and food insecurity is disproportionately worse, according to the Library of Parliament reports. I mean, when you live in an Arctic tundra, you get what you get. Like, people in Nunavut pay, $10 for a bag of milk. You know why. In some places, it's much easier to prioritize buying healthy food, says Cumberschmidt. In northern communities, it's essentially impossible for them to do it in a lot of cases. You can see why they would have to prioritize affordability over actual function of the food. The researchers consider climate events such as drought, exchange and interest rates, labor issues such as the shortage of truck drivers, new policies such as the changes to the temporary foreign worker program, and the Trump factor as potential drivers of price increases in 2025. Cumberschmidt highlights that the rising cost of food is one piece of the greater affordability puzzle. It is not necessary that the price of food is so expensive. It is that people are having to make these really hard decisions based on the current economic climate we're in. Canadians have become more price aware, with roughly half seeking sales and discounts on groceries, says Sylvain Charbois. Charbois? I hope that's pronouncing that right. Director of Dalhousie University's Agri-Food Analytics Lab and the report's project lead. Others have found more different ways to save, such as switching brands, shopping at cheaper stores, and foraging on non-essential food items. According to Hunger Count, more Canadians are turning to food banks than ever before. The Canadian Food Sentiment Index shows that nearly half of Generation Z or Generation Z draw on more savings or borrow money to buy food. Smiths expects people to continue using defined strategies to lower grocery bills, such as coupons and credit card points. Janet Music, the AAL Research Program Coordinator, thinks traditional practices will become more critical. All these tips and tricks your grandmother or your mom may have taught you about saving money and not wasting food are still as important now as they were back in the recession, she says. We should always try to eat what we buy and buy what we eat. Now, it's funny that they bring that up because, I get it. I stand with that statistics. It's a good principle to live on, that you should buy what is necessary for you. Don't overconsume. Don't, because, food waste is also a big problem with a lot of people. And if you look at certain places, like you go, for example, Italy and a lot of these European nations, where a lot of the individuals there, a lot of the people in those countries, to them, it's such a foreign concept to drive to a grocery store, to drive to Costco, to drive to Walmart and load up on groceries for the week. It's such a foreign concept to them because in their lifestyle, in their culture, they have marketplaces. So when Italians would walk by on their way to work or picking up the kids, or maybe they're walking home from work, they stop at these marketplaces and they buy their dinner, they buy their meals. And what's interesting about that is when they stop at these marketplaces, what they buy at that time is what they're going to eat at that day. So they know that it's fresh. They know it's organic because a lot of these marketplaces are run by farmers and run by agriculturalists in the area. And there's no food waste because you're buying what you're going to consume later that night. So that's interesting to note on that. GDP per capita dropped for the sixth consecutive quarter, highlights Charbois. With no wealth creation, it's hard to sell more expensive food. So that's why more stores are turning into discount stores. He adds that loyalty programs are effective yet underused ways to save money. And of course, there's waste. Best before dates are just a suggestion. That's a lesson I learned back in college, actually. when, when you're on student loans and basically a 99 cent sale at your local grocery store is like a miracle when you've been striving away on 50 shades of ramen. Oh, the good old days. But here's here's CTV News pointing this out because they mentioned about the food banks. And we have seen reports increasing about food banks that are scavenging because there's such a huge demand, but there's not enough supply. And it's on the brinks of collapse because over 2 million Canadians across this nation a month are now relying on food banks so heavily that they can't keep up with numbers. And this is what I call a nation in decline. This is a failing nation when you have so many people relying on food banks that the necessities of life, people are scavenging around and barely can afford to keep their heads above water in one of the richest nations on earth is just detrimental. So here's what CTV News said about it.
If more isn't done, the food bank system nationwide could collapse. For some, a local food bank is a critical part of their safety net. CTV's Heather Wright reports.
This is just part of the line outside a Toronto food bank today, where thousands of clients will shop this week, a number that keeps going up.
As a single mother of 4 kids, it's not easy for me.
According to Food Banks Canada, 1 in 4 Canadians are experiencing food insecurity, while nearly half of those surveyed feel they are doing worse financially than they were a year ago. These are statistics Lee Soda sees every day.
There are people who are working, fully employed, and having to access the food bank. We have seniors, we have newcomers, we have students.
Today, Food Banks Canada released its annual poverty report card, a look at the challenges facing Canadians and how well governments are responding to them.
What a kind of ironic name to have the name Lee Soda and work at a food bank. That's kind of funny.
Not doing enough as a country to make sure people are able to make ends meet right now.
Most provincial governments received grades in the D range, while 7 out of 10 got a D- for what the report called an insufficient approach to poverty reduction. A lack of affordable housing and stubbornly high food prices have created a perfect storm of need in many parts of the country, and there are concerns the system simply can't keep up.
They cannot continue to meet the growing demands with the amount of food and donations that are coming through the doors. And even then, no system is designed for, growth like we've seen.
The report includes a number of policy recommendations, among them rent control and increasing social assistance. Building more houses is also needed, something the provinces and the federal government have promised, but which will take years. The report also found more young people are turning to food banks. Between February and April of this year, a quarter of those aged 18 to 24 went to a charity because they didn't have enough money to buy food. Heather Wright, CTV News.
So that's, again, the visual signs of a nation in decline. This is when our empire is collapsing. And considering the fact that we sent $19.5 billion off to NATO for endless warfare, we were just able to just find that money in the back of our pockets and just give it to them without any question, without any hesitation. But yet, 2 million people a month going to food banks as prices are soaring, as insecurity is soaring, as financial stability is being jeopardized constantly in this nation. We just have no means or no initiative to help our own Canadians. That's just kind of disastrous. It's disastrous. And considering the fact that tax dollars that would go into investing in Canadians, particularly in these sectors, would actually help flourish this nation and make it better. but we're draining ourselves, we're draining out our economy, we're draining out our finances, causing more inflation, causing a more of a cost of living shortage and crisis that we're dealing with right now, to send it off for warfare, to send it off for Trudeau to fix his crony corruption and buying up NYC condos and shit like that. We are just draining this country dry and just leaving these people out to die. And this has been going on for a long while now. This has been going on for a couple years. It's getting worse now. We're realizing that now, going into the election year. We're finally seeing more reports about it. But it's been going on for such a long while that you may recall that back in 2022, when Pierre Poilievre used to do these YouTube videos, trying to connect more with the general population of Canada, which is pretty actually effective. I'll say it's pretty effective that a politician would actually use social media for its intention of reaching out to people. And he did this little skit here, pretending to have breakfast with Justin Trudeau while talking about inflation. And I'd say this is probably the most effective video he's ever done. Even far beyond the apple eating in front of the reporter. Remember that? I'd say this is more effective. And I'm not going to show all of it because it's a fairly lengthy clip, but I'm going to show a couple minutes of it. And this is back in 2022. And it's getting worse now, almost at the end of 2024. So here's what he said back then.
Oh, Justin, you're awake. You made it. Have a seat. Have a coffee. You need some. Wakey time. Thanks very much for taking my invitation to have a little breakfast. I know you're just back from your vacation in Costa Rica. And there's a few things you might not have noticed while you were gone, starting with the price of coffee. It's up 14% in 1 year. Not just coffee, Justin. Bacon is up 8%. Milk to put in your coffee, it's up 7%. Bread's up 15%. And the butter on the bread, that's up 17%, Justin. Eggs, up 16%. So the average Canadian can't even dream of going on a vacation right now to Costa Rica. They're just dreaming about, well, affording food. In fact, there's a poll out, Justin, you might find interesting. About a quarter of Canadians are now borrowing money just for essentials like eating. Justin, can you imagine taking out a loan so that you can eat? Remember when you said that you were borrowing money so that Canadians didn't have to? Well, now Canadians are borrowing up a storm because they can't afford the higher prices that you've imposed on them, right?
So that was back in 2022. They was saying that. And it's gotten worse. They haven't even attempted to fix any of this. It's gotten worse over the years. And what he's saying then is definitely correct now, and it's going to only get worse post GST moratorium, post holiday, when they try to bribe you with your own money. Here's $250 to be able to afford somewhat of a Christmas. But then after that, it's going to cost you about $800 more to feed your family. So that $250 doesn't go anywhere at that point. $250 is barely making bank on the situation that we're in. And like you said there, people are taking out loans. People are using their credit cards and creating even more credit card debt right now to afford basic necessities like food. And that's because we have not only just the horrible inflation that we have not dealt with, that we've not held account to that, the cost of living crisis, the house unaffordability, stuff like that, but also we've demonized our own farmers that grow these crops, that make the dairy, that produce these organic goods to our own citizens. You remember we did that video where we showed the one farmer in, I think, Sarnia, Sarnia, Ontario, who was a dairy farmer. He overproduced milk. He overproduced his inventory. And usually when a business overproduces their inventory, they try to sell at a cheaper rate. They try to, pour it off as much as possible, sell at a cheaper rate. But because of such the restrictions that they put on farmers, because of these conglomeracies, these parent companies that have stormed into farmers, they're forced to dump out that milk because they want to keep the cost high. They want to keep the profitability high for organic food, for food that grows in your backyard, for food that grows outside your door, in farmland, in communities across this country. And that is why a lot of these farmers are feeling the brunt of all of this. And a lot of these farmers are forced to sell off their land because they can't afford one of the greatest professions and one of the oldest professions to ever known of mankind, which is to grow food. And it's because of these horrible policies that never get mentioned, that never get addressed. Pierre Poilievre has addressed this multiple times. He's mentioned about the horrific scenes. And let's also note about this, that we talked about this, how sad that over 15,000 people waited in line in the pouring rain for hours just for the hopes of getting some free produce. Ugly Potato Day in BC. Canada is broken. This was brought attention to House of Commons numerous amount of times, by the Conservative members, by the NDP members, by Pierre Poilievre himself, even addressing that. And what was the Liberal response? Christian Freeland going up and saying, well, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say, like, we went to a school in Winnipeg, and we gave some kids, like, a banana, an apple, and some raisins, and, like, a juice box. And then we took a photo with them. So we did our part. There's nothing else we could do. Why can't you just give us credit for this one little action we did? Because feeding one kid is going to solve 1,500 people in BC. Just on that day alone. That was back in October. Here we are in December, where it's only getting worse. The homeless crisis is skyrocketing. We're into the colder winter months, and usually at that time, the colder winter months, a lot of the organic foods do get more expensive because they have to import those foods in because our crops aren't able to grow through the winter. Understandable. But now, on top of high inflation, on top of the cost of food, the cost of living, everything in between, it's making this worse. So that is the wake-up call, ladies and gentlemen. And don't get fooled by the $250 possible check you may or may not get in February. Because that $250 is meaningless. It's worthless at this point. Considering the fact that on top of your cost of food of going up to feed your families, to feed your kids, to feed your loved ones, the carbon tax will also increase by the spring. So gasoline, trucking, getting foods to all these grocery stores, to retail giants, that's going to go up. And it's just going to cause a more devastation by the next few years if we don't address it today. If we don't address, we should have addressed it yesterday and made full concern about this, because this is unacceptable. This is absolutely unacceptable that we can send $19.5 billion overseas to go slaughter more people as a commitment to NATO, but our politicians have no commitment to the people that run this country, to Canadians, to Canadian families. They have no commitment to serve you, but they have every which commitment to steal your money, drain out our finances, drain out our Federal Reserve, and send it overseas to go mass slaughter more people. And Chrystia Freeland begs the House of Commons to give her credit because she gave one school kid, a banana. And said, look, we're feeding kids, healthy kids. Yay! Look at me go. Well, this is happening.